again, my name is Diane Smalley. I practice acupuncture here in Willits. I'd like to start by talking about the mission of my practice, which is to give you a map so that you can ride the waves of life in health and peace. Because I believe that each one of you has a gift to give to the world, and the more rested you are, the better you'll be able to give that gift. So that's why we're all here. Technically, this talk should be, did you see that little about come in there? We're talking really about 8 hours. 8 hours is not written in stone. And some people do better on a little less, some people do better on a little more. For instance, children and teens, especially teens, tend to need more sleep. So what keeps you awake? Anyone?
Anxiety.
Anxiety.
Thinking about what I have to do.
Thinking about what you have to do. Pain.
My cat.
A cat.
I just wake up. I'll go to sleep and sleep good for 2 or 3 hours, and I'll just wake up for no reason.
Okay.
And I have no idea, and I'm just awake.
Just wake up for no reason.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm just repeating that so everyone can hear. And that we're going to talk about all those things. Anyone else? Everyone else sleeps through the night.
No.
Can't shut your brain off. How many of you here do feel like you sleep pretty well through the night? Wake up once or less a night. Good, good, all right. And so if you have any insights that I don't have, please feel free to add ideas. Our first thing that keeps us awake is stress. And my best definition of stress is changes. Anytime things are changing, it calls on our ability to adapt. And especially if those changes are unpredictable. Especially if the changes or challenges are quite dramatic. You know, the bigger the change, the higher the stress, obviously. And it could be a pleasant thing or unpleasant. Low blood sugar, we're going to be talking a lot about that. That's one of the main things that causes us to wake up at night. And I think that's probably what keeps me awake when I'm not eating properly. We heard the word pain, also illness, and a lot of times that centers in the bladder and the prostate, sometimes kind of a little bit of both. Our environment. Most of us live in places where it gets pretty dark at night, so that's not a problem. But who sleeps with their cell phone in the room? Okay, so we're going to talk about that. Things like, and Josephine mentioned shift work, people who have to work all through the night and have to sleep during the day. Obviously, that's going to be a problem. And things like jet lag going, you can't fly 12 hours and expect to be chipper. And then many drugs have the effect of causing insomnia. And many drugs have an unintended effect of causing insomnia. Last but not least, we find that a lot of people wake up because they stop breathing. And the word apnea, pnea, means to breathe, P-N-E-A, or pneumatic. You've heard of a pneumatic drill or things like that. You see that P-N, that means breathing, and A means not, so it's not breathing. So you hear that word a lot. Which leads me to a really important point, is that is a Latin word, and all of our medicine terms are in Latin, and that's so that different doctors can speak to each other and understand what they're talking about very specifically. In fact, that's true in all of science. However, it's something that has kind of kept us from understanding our bodies. And so what I've been doing these days is taking all the things I've learned the last 30 years and distilling them down to the kindergarten level. Because I figure if a kindergarten can understand it, an adult can most likely understand it. And so in some ways, this class is really about doing nothing. Because sleep is just stopping and resting. And we think we're kind of doing nothing when we're sleeping, but actually the brain is clearing itself out. We're producing growth hormone in the night to repair the body, so we have physical restoration. And then the mind is doing a lot of sorting and restoring important memories and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are going on at night. We have to start somewhere. And what I recommend, if you're following along at all, I want to say that all of the words that are on this PowerPoint, except for a few at the beginning, I'll let you know, are in here. So it won't have to write anything down from what you see on the slides. But this back page is kind of a overall map of where we're going. And we're going to start in the west with easing stress. This little guy right here has an advantage over us. He has something in he or she has something in common with us. Right about in there, in the brain, right in the center of the brain, they have a structure that's called the hypothalamus. And we have that in common. It's called the mammalian brain, or the mammal brain, the emotional brain sometimes it's called. And we'll come back to that. So this is a beautiful picture of, I believe, China. The most basic principle that we use in Chinese medicine is called yin and yang. And it comes from looking at the hills and the valleys. So that's where that drawing of the yin and yang comes from. Isn't that spectacular? And so we have the dark and the light. And so here's that yin and yang symbol right there. And so the reason I drew it on an angle like this is because if we take this curve right here, see how steady my hand is right now, and if we continue that out, we have what I like to call the usual wave. And this is the wave that we operate on all day long. And it basically involves night and day, dark and light, sleeping and waking. And we're going to find out that it's cortisol and melatonin, cortisol and melatonin. And if you start looking at it, there's examples of yin and yang all over the place. Everywhere you look, you can find those. This is where ideally we spend most of our time. If an emergency happens, what happens to that wave? It turns into a storm wave. And so now I'm on the boat and I'm adapting. If the boat was rocking, I wouldn't just be tossed around with it. I'd fall down. So my body has a natural ability to adapt to those rocking waves. And so we call that, basically when there's an emergency, we're either angry or afraid. Those are the two basic emotions that stimulate our stress response. And so we call that fight or flight. If I'm angry, I'll fight. If I'm afraid, I'll run. So where does the blood go? The blood tends to go away from the center out to the limbs to get us ready to run or fight. And so this is how we adapt to the changes. And so then, ideally, when the emergency ends, we have a chance to settle down and come back to what we call the rest and digest. So we could call this alarm and rest. We're either in one or the other. There's no such thing as being in both at the same time. And so it's easy though for that stress, that emergency state, that alarm state to get stuck on, as we'll see. And so in order to sleep, the adrenal glands need to be quiet. And so once again, I was pointing on that little Arctic fox to this particular part of the brain, right in the center. It's kind of right behind the eyes. And this slide is hard to read, and that's not important, but light comes in and it stimulates this part of the brain to then set us up for all the rhythms that we have in our body. And that part of the brain is called the hypothalamus. I like to call it the monitor. It's watching all the time, monitoring everything that's going on in the body. So it's very busy monitoring what's going on. And when it finds something that it needs to change, it sends a message to the pituitary. The pituitary is the operator. And the operator sends out the messages to the different glands, many different glands, all the endocrine glands in the body. So we call that the operator. And one gland that it sends message to is called the adrenals. They sit on, the kidneys are called the renals, so the adrenals sit on top of the kidney. And I like to call them the adaptor glands. As it says here, the adrenals produce two different hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, produce many different hormones, but these are two of the main ones that we talk about. And we want to really focus on cortisol, because that is the hormone that directs our day, that directs that usual wave. Look at all the things that cortisol does. It's not intended for us to necessarily read all this, but it's a long list of things, and there's many other things. But mostly stabilizing the blood sugar, the blood pressure, supporting healthy bone, etc. One way that we can tell what's going on with the cortisol in the body is we can do a test of the saliva. So at night, the cortisol is replenishing, and then this is showing during the day. This person took 4 samples of their cortisol, of the saliva. The cortisol level was measured, and it showed that it was fairly high in the day. This is a normal sample, and then it goes down and flattens out a little and then goes down, and then it replenishes in the night. When people are stressed, we'll see cortisol going like this, or it might go backwards. And then over time, as people become more and more fatigued, I've seen cortisol that's going down about here, at this level. And we find that cortisol works in the day and rebuilds at night. So what are some of the things that cause cortisol to go up? There's 3 or 4 main things that we can talk about. When there's injury, that causes the pituitary to send that signal to produce cortisol. The blood sugar is uncontrolled, and mental and emotional stress. So there's kind of 2 levels of stress. When we're younger maybe, or if the stress is fairly new and something we've been dealing with for a while, the cortisol will be high to handle that stress. But over time, when that fight or flight kind of gets stuck on, that's a sign that upstream, the monitor is now getting tired. And it's saying, okay, I get it, there's enough cortisol being produced. And so I'm going to stop sending that signal. And so we lose our ability to adapt to stress sometimes. But it can be repaired, and cortisol just kind of goes down and down, is reduced. Now this is something that I learned many, many years ago, and it's been really helpful for me to understand. And as I tell you this, you're going to know more than 90% of the people out there, because this is a really unique way to think of this. We call it the merry-go-round. So we've just talked about how when we get into fight or flight mode, adrenaline goes up, and so does cortisol. And so one of the things that happens, I just mentioned that that causes the blood to go out to the running and fighting muscles. And so there's less blood in the digestive tract. And the stomach needs a good supply of blood to make the hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Hydrochloric acid is very important. We need that hydrochloric acid to break down our protein, to break down calcium, to break down iron, and to create B12 and things like that. So as we make less hydrochloric acid in the stomach, that's already going to cause stress. Where's the first place we feel stress? Oh, that's the stomach going down in function. And so when we just think of the protein going into the stomach, if it's not really being broken down by that really strong acid, it's got a pH of about 1 or 2. So it's breaking that protein down into a liquid. If it doesn't break down, it kind of just sits there. And now, because the hydrochloric acid hasn't been produced, we're stimulating less bile flow from the liver. I gave a talk on this a few years ago called The Happy Belly, and I highly recommend that you go to the Avenues to Wellness site and check out the speaker series, because there's an archive. Speaker series archive has all those talks listed, and they're on Vimeo, and they're great to watch. So I gave a talk on this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this concept, but trust me, when there's less hydrochloric acid in the stomach, there's less bile flowing from the liver and gallbladder. And as a result, we're really having a hard time breaking down that protein. Then the protein just rots. And protein does not smell good when it's rotting. And one of the things that happens when protein breaks down too far is it produces histamine in the body. Histamine is a natural substance that we produce all the time as cells are turning over and breaking down. We're producing that. And what it is, it's a chemical messenger that goes through the body, especially the lymph system, to trigger the inflammatory process. And so that now we've got histamine building up, and we've got more inflammation going on, especially in the digestive tract, at least at this point. And it just so happens that we have an anti-inflammatory in the body called cortisol. You've probably heard of cortisone or prednisone. These are the synthetic cortisols. What do? Who knows what prednisone is used for? Inflammation. It's a very powerful and effective anti-inflammatory. And just so happens that the cortisol in our body does that too. So now we're on this merry-go-round. what was an external stress that caused the adrenals to respond is now an internal stress in causing more inflammation in the body. If I have this much histamine in my body, I'm going to tend to have this much inflammation. And as the histamine builds up, it goes up. And so where are we now? We're in the springtime. And anybody who's having allergy type of symptoms from all the pollens and so forth, that is the classic histamine response. So the histamine tends to store in this area, and when the pollens come in, they're kind of spiky and they trigger that histamine to be released, and so we have the itchy eyes and the runny nose and so forth. A lot of people take an antihistamine, and what that tends to do is it tends to drive the histamine back into storage. But as soon as you stop taking the antihistamine, it kind of comes out again. And so we have lots of good ways to get histamine out of the body. So that's what we want to do, is we want to have a pathway for getting the histamine out. And it's mostly the liver that does that. And if we can get off this merry-go-round, so if we can handle our stress, that's the first step, is finding ways to handle that. And then maybe take a little digestive enzyme and eat foods that stimulate the bile to flow, then we tend to slow this merry-go-round off, and we can get off that merry-go-round. Well, the first example is all your vegetables. Vegetables are our medicine. I like to think of food as medicine, and that is the very best one. When cortisol is elevated, that is the main thing that gives us a hard time falling asleep. How many people, when they go to sleep, they kind of lie there and it takes them a long time to fall asleep? Just a few. That's not a big problem here. So, or how many people wake up at some point in the night and they look at the clock and it's kind of the same time every night? People recognize that? Okay, so it's the adrenals that are doing that. So we're going to talk about melatonin in a minute. Melatonin, people tend to know that it's the sleep and wake regulator. And cortisol and melatonin are kind of a yin and yang pair. Like I was saying before, when cortisol is high, it's kind of hard for melatonin to come up and stimulate the sleep cycle to happen. So the adrenal glands, what they really need the most is regularity, predictability, things to be even, eating regular meals. If we're really into a big debt with the adrenal glands, eating a good balanced meal, which I'll come to in a minute, every couple hours, a small snack every couple hours, that can really help the adrenal glands. For people who are, going along pretty well, breakfast, lunch, dinner. The main time I do that is when I go visit my parents. Because my folks always eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the clock. This is one of my challenges, is having those regular meals because of working the way I do. Here's some really key things to help to balance that cortisol. And my favorite signature thing is to exhale on effort. So let's just take a moment right this second. And what I'd like you to do is just feel the chair that you're sitting in. Just kind of become aware of the chair. And really feel how sturdy that chair is. And you can really trust that chair to hold you. And so that's a good first step, to just let your weight be held by that chair. And so then let's emphasize the exhale. The inhale happens automatically. We don't really have to think about inhaling. But the exhale, we have a little bit more say over that. And of all the reflexive functions in the body, the breath is the one that we have the most immediate control over. So we can really use our breath to calm us down. When we're at rest, the exhale is naturally a little longer than the inhale. So by extending the exhale, it sends a message back up to that monitor up here that we're at rest. And obvious things like having a massage and laughing. Then certain nutrients are really important. Vitamin C, the adrenals are a huge repository of vitamin C. In this country, we call vitamin C ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is the shell of the vitamin C. The way I like to think of it in shorthand is ascorbic acid will not cure scurvy, but lime juice will. So it's the whole vitamin C. So ideally, we get these nutrients from our food. And we'll talk about ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is an adaptogen herb. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Omega-3 is pretty common. How many people take omega-3? Most everybody, about half of you. Okay. And so the first step with the adrenals is the cortisol tends to be increased to handle the stress. But over time, it can become low, and I'll come back to this in a minute, the reason why. When the stress is prolonged, the cortisol can be lowered. And so that's a sign that the problem is upstream from the hypothalamus, or the monitor. And so this is an example of a tonic that we use to repair the adrenals. This is one of the best tools that we have. It's kind of an international formula, because Rehmannia is a Chinese herb that's classically used to heal the kidney. So it's a kidney tonic herb, but it's not exactly an adaptogen. Ashwagandha is an adaptogen herb, and so that means adaptogens have that word adapt, so it generates our ability to adapt. If we've got too much energy, it will lower it. If we've got not enough, it will raise it. So that's what an adaptogen does. It has an amphoteric effect, but it's a balancing effect, it's called. So those are the two main herbs, and then we put some echinacea, which is a good herb for the immune system and just generally helping to repair. And then a small amount of licorice. Licorice is the classic herb we use in Chinese medicine to take the herbs to the whole body. But also it is beneficial for the adrenals. And we use a very small amount, so it's not a problem for anyone with high blood pressure. Has anyone ever had the experience of sitting down or doing something in the garden, crouching down, and then standing up and feeling lightheaded? Kind of dizzy? That's called what's happening there is, so if I'm lying down and I get up and start to walk, I want my heart to be able to come along and beat a little harder to make it so that I can keep going. But if my adrenals are low, the adrenals are what stimulate that. So it's like, oh, it was a change. I was lying down, now I'm standing up. And so we want the adrenals to kick in to get us going so that we can do whatever it is we want to do. The adrenals are low, they're kind of sluggish and don't get the blood pressure going quite fast enough. And so what we do is we take the blood pressure lying down after resting for a little bit, and then we have you stand up and take it again. And depending on what it does, we want it to go up a little bit. But some people who are very stressed, the blood pressure actually goes down, and we can tell quite a bit from that test. Now we're going to go around the map to the south. And so we're going to talk about balancing the blood sugar. The more our blood sugar is balanced, the less work the adrenals have to do. And I chose this picture because I was making my omelet on Sunday morning, and these were all the ingredients, and so I thought I'd take a picture. And all of these, eggs, red bell pepper, mushrooms, onion, there's some garlic there somewhere, the egg yolks, and the greens, this is some parsley. These are all the foods that the liver uses to detoxify. So your question about foods that stimulate the bile to flow, this is it. We're going to learn about 3 different organs in the body. There's 3 main organs that balance the blood sugar. The liver, the pancreas, and the adrenals. And so here's a good little picture of the adrenal glands right here. These little guys right here, sitting on top. These are the kidneys, and the adrenal glands sit on top. They're fairly small, just kind of the size of a nut. And they have an inside and outside, and they make different hormones. The main organ we think of when it comes to blood sugar is the pancreas, right? So the pancreas makes insulin, and that gets the sugar to go into the cells. And then if it's time for some sugar to come out of the cells, the pancreas can also make glucagon to tell the sugar to release glucose, because the liver stores the blood sugar, stores the sugar in the form of glycogen. And the adrenals are one of the triggers to tell the pancreas to release glucagon and tell the liver to release sugar. It's up to the adrenals, because they're the ones that are in touch with the monitor to know when it's time to do all that. So this is what we call the blood sugar roller coaster, and this is a main cause of waking up in the night. And we'll see why. So when we eat some sugar, it goes woo, the blood sugar goes up, and so the insulin is secreted, and so the blood sugar goes into the cells of the body. And technically this should be a person what's not shown on this person is kind of overweight, because they've been eating too much sugar, especially late at night. And so they've been putting on fat, because insulin triggers fat storage, so does cortisol trigger fat storage. But then what tends to happen is when what must go up comes down, so the blood sugar drops. So when there's a big flow of insulin, the blood sugar tends to drop. And at this point, cortisol tells the liver, we need more blood sugar again, take some glycogen and send it back out into the body. So that's how blood sugar is maintained. But ideally, we go along a little bit more like this, so that the blood sugar is more even, less for the adrenals to do. And so that is the key. That's what we want to have going on at night. And so if we've been good to our liver and our pancreas and so forth, we've got nice even blood sugar and we've got good stores of sugar in the liver so that we can fast through the night. That's where the word breakfast comes from, is we fasted through the night. And so blood sugar, like I said, is the main reason we wake up in the night. When the blood sugar drops, it kind of stimulates the adrenals. It wakes the adrenals up. And in order for the adrenal glands to do what they're doing, to save our life by getting a little more blood sugar back, sugar into the blood, they have to be awake. So when that cortisol goes up, we wake up. So they need us to be awake. They need our body to be awake in order to work. And that's sort of a well-known fact. And so, like I said, a happy liver has that good store of glycogen. How do we stabilize the blood sugar? So how many people tend to do that, wake up and have a hard time falling back to sleep at night? And it might be different times. Okay. What you can do is have a small snack. So when you make your dinner, what I recommend is save a piece of broccoli and just a bite or two of that chicken and put it in a little container in the fridge or something like that. And then a few hours later, after you've had your dinner, go back and have that little snack, just a bite or two of a couple things, and we'll talk about more about what foods. Because what that does is it kind of stabilizes the blood sugar and gives a little food in there so that you can make it through the night. And any meal or snack ideally has protein, carb, and fat. And I like to think of carbohydrate more as vegetable. Most people know what protein is. That's our animal foods. And if you're a vegetarian, it'd be more like beans. And then fat often is part of the protein here. Like egg has some fat in it as well. But some other good fats would be coconut butter, cheese, avocado, things like that. So now we get the idea, kind of know what those foods are. Again, save a little bite of dinner. And some other ideas, jicama, a few nuts, yogurt and fruit. Anybody ever eat avocado and grapefruit together? It's actually really good. And a shell-cooked egg. I have a recipe for how to make shell-cooked eggs in your notes. So that's there. And I call it shell-cooked rather than hard-boiled. That's kind of how we think of it. I don't really like to boil eggs. I like to put it in the water so that it's just coming to a boil at the done time. And when we cook anything in water, it's automatically a lower heat, and so it's going to preserve the good things in the food, like the egg. All right, moving on around. Any questions about blood sugar? Yes.
My question is that why I wake up hungry? I wake up at 3 o'clock every morning, and I wake up hungry. I don't eat, but...
It could be, and you could actually go and get that little bite, and what's also is happening is cortisol. That's a sign of cortisol going up. Cortisol has an effect of making us a little hungry. Kind of says, okay, it's time to eat now. And going back to that saliva test that I showed you, we take those samples of cortisol at those times because cortisol is kind of rising at mealtime. And so that explains that. Also, it might also be, sometimes we think of hunger, so you have a little feeling in your stomach, sensation in your stomach. Does that happen to you? It's more like, oh, food, must have food. So it's probably more that this adrenal function going on. Yes?
So when I wake up in the morning, energetically, it almost feels, the energy in my body is different than regular. It's almost like that, when you're on a bumpy road that goes like this, I kind of have a feeling in here.
So when you wake up, you're having a little, almost of a shaky feeling?
I wouldn't say it's shaking.
Kind of a revving, kind of, almost?
No, it's kind of like this, but it's not a shaking.
Almost like riding on a bumpy road.
Yeah, it's like a corrugated road, you know.
I would say that is cortisol, either too high or too low. And it would be good to test that to see what's going on there.
Where can you do the saliva test?
I have little boxes. There's a company. There's several companies that do saliva tests. There's a company that I use called Diagnostics. They're up in Seattle, and they're the only company I know of that tests pituitary hormones, and they seem to be quite good. And you collect the saliva, put it in a box, and send it off UPS, and the results come back. Another question?
You say low blood sugar, it's too low, so you want to bump it up a little bit by eating a little bit.
Right.
Not too much, because then you go through the cycle again?
Exactly. Uh-huh.
Okay.
And it's very important what we choose at that time. And we'll see in a minute there's some other problems with that. So eating healthy, a balanced meal that is not too high in carbs. It's okay to have some carbs in there, but not too high. In fact, nowadays you hear more about people saying it's good to eat carbohydrates in the evening for that reason, to store some for the night. I'm a little skeptical of that. I haven't really seen that. But so, does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, good.
Oh, Diane?
Yes.
Getting back to what this gentleman said, that he wakes up hungry at
Uh-huh.
the same time at 3 o'clock, but he doesn't eat. So what does he do to his body when he doesn't take those little things? Is he injured or something? Or
Okay, the question is, what should this, can I use your name, Lou? What should Lou do when he wakes up hungry? And my feeling is that it would be okay to go and have that little snack. Just a couple of bites of something. And because that will satisfy the adrenals and keep the blood sugar more even so that you can fall back to sleep. So I'll kind of keep thinking about that.
What about turning lights on to do that? The pituitary and all that?
Exactly, exactly. So what you'd want to do is have it by the bedside. And, have it as close as you can, because that's a really good point. And we'll see that in a minute when we turn the light on. That changes everything. Okay, so we'll come back. We'll keep working on that. So does anybody know what this is?
Poison.
Okay, that perfect example of inflammation, although that's not the kind of inflammation we're going to talk about. So, pain is a sign of inflammation. What I recommend using for inflammation is turmeric. And there's a lot of different forms. It's the rave right now is to use turmeric. And what I have found is I have access to all the best supplements in the world. And there are some that bond the lecithin, they take the active ingredient from the turmeric, the curcumin, and bond it with lecithin, and that really gets it into the cells. Lecithin is an emulsifier. It's made by our liver, actually, too. And it emulsifies the fats in the cell wall and gets it right through and takes it to where it needs to go. And I'd rather use the turmeric than other anti-inflammatory pharmaceuticals. Once again, they work now and they work every time. Things like ibuprofen and the different NSAIDs. However, they cause more injury to the intestinal tract, which causes more inflammation, as we've seen, and they actually block the resolution of the inflammation. And I think that the overuse of the NSAIDs, especially the over-the-counter type, are what are causing a lot of the arthritis epidemic that we have in our world.
Well, I just read something about how anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen and Advil actually are damaging it's a cardiac lining around the heart.
Yeah. So Mona was saying that the anti-inflammatories, the NSAIDs, can damage the lining around the heart. So, and that information is out there now. It's coming along. We have a solution, and I don't want to take too much time on this, but this is actually a really good thing. We'll come back to this too. As we're falling asleep, when we're lying down, it's a perfect time to do some self-massage. So, and as we're going to see, we're going to tune in and see where are those aches and pains, and just holding that part can be very helpful, but giving it some circular rubs, and we'll talk about this. Well, actually, I think I have a little blurb on that. So giving some, I call it combing out the tangles. We call it 10 on the tender. Let's see. This book here is my favorite book of all time, the Trigger Point Therapy Workbook. You've all heard me talk about this. And here's someone using what's called a Theracane. It's kind of a hook-like thing, so she can get around to the back and press on her back. And you can work on your whole back, you can work on your neck. It has all these little points on it, and it's talked about in here. And here's a picture from this book of someone using a ball against the wall here to kind of roll on that muscle on the bottom there. We have over 300 muscles on each side of our body. And any one of them can be tangled. Anything that we do repetitively causes those fibers to contract and release and eventually tangle and spasm. That's the body talking to us. Pain is a signal from the body talking to us and telling us, basically, if we listen, what it's saying is, rub me and rub that spot. So we find the tender spot and we give it 10 little flushes. Just a couple more things about the effects of medications, because this came up a minute ago too. Many, many medications, almost. In fact, I took this from a book called Drug Muggers. It's written by a woman who's a pharmacist. Her name is Susie Cohen. And she goes through all of the nutrients that we need and tells the effect of medications on all of those nutrients. The book is listed in your handout. It's an excellent book. She writes quite well. She writes kind of, I call it Reader's Digest style, kind of folksy, but it's good. And also, it's really good to look up your drugs on drugs.com. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. I see a lot of people who are taking 7 and 8, 10 medications. And just yesterday, I was working with someone, a gal, and she was great because she didn't want to take, she only wanted to take as few medications as she could. And I said, a lot of people don't know what they're taking. She turned to me and said, people don't know what they're taking? She just couldn't believe that. But again, who can pronounce rofecoxib? I mean, it's just these crazy names. And, here's a few of them. Well, benzodiazepines, that's a whole class of anti-anxiety drugs. And these are the main drugs that are, these are the sleeping pills. And they're the ones that end in PAM, diazepam, lorazepam. That's Valium, Xanax, Ativan, and so forth. They knock you out, and they knock you out now. And they work really well. You go to sleep. At least you're in bed, and your eyes are closed, and you're not awake. But they're really interfering with that deep sleep that you need. And another thing is they kind of loosen your inhibitions a little bit. So you go, oh yeah, Diane said to go eat a snack. Oh yeah, there's that cake. I'm going to have half of that instead of the broccoli and the chicken. And so that's a problem. But I want to make sure to say this really clearly. We do not stop any medication at all, especially these, right away. They have to be taken down very, very slowly and carefully. Because what they do is they interfere with a lot of our natural processes. If we stop them, those natural processes have nothing to go on. And so there's real problems. It's the same thing with going off the opiates that we're seeing in our country now. And with some nutritional support, that can really go a long way. But it's really between you and your doctor to take care of that. So now we're coming to the center of the wheel here. And I love this term, diversity of culture, because it's true on the outside and the inside. A diverse community is a strong community, right? I took this picture at the Standing Rock Day, and look at all the kids. It was really fun. But we also need diversity of culture in the microbiome of the body. So we're going to work our way towards that. So this picture, you don't need to spend a lot of time on this picture, but it sort of shows that we wake up in the morning and then we have noon and evening and night. And they find, this was just testing a group of people, and they found that different things happen at different times, like the lowest body temperature. And I'm not crazy about this because they say melatonin secretion stops and starts. And I don't think it actually stops and starts. It's a wave, just like everything else. It shows that we have certain things that happen during the day. And I found this really answered some quite good questions for me. I love doing these talks because I learned so much. There's a chemical called adenosine. And it kind of builds up during the day as we go along. And when it gets high enough, we become sleepy. And then it kind of gets cleared out at night, and so we wake up. And this explains how we can take a nap during the day. We don't have to wait till that. The naps are not really on the circadian rhythm, but if we have enough adenosine built up, we can take a little nap. So that gives us the drive to sleep. So we're coming back to that first slide of the monitor, the operator, and the adapters. And now we're adding another little structure that's right there near the hypothalamus called the pineal. Most people have heard of the pineal gland as being the gland that watches the light and responds to the light. And so we're going to call that gland the clock, because it's watching the light come and go during the day. When the light becomes dim, it triggers the release of melatonin, which tells the body to go to sleep. And in the daytime, like all the other hormones, they're feeding back to the hypothalamus and saying, yes, we've got enough. We're producing it, and it kind of checks in. All the other glands and the hormones that they produce feed back to the hypothalamus to make sure that we have all the information coming in, so the hypothalamus knows how much more to send out. What's happening here is cortisol and melatonin are in a wave relationship with each other. So when cortisol is high, melatonin is low, like I said before. And another thing that I wasn't able to fit on here is that cortisol can have a negative effect on the pineal. If the cortisol is high, basically that's saying the same thing. Cortisol can block the effectiveness of the pineal. So that's why we 10 o'clock comes and goes, and we were a little sleepy, but we woke up and got that second wind. How many people experience that? And we keep going and can stay up. So that's cortisol going, we're not going to go to sleep now, we're going to stay up. Melatonin is sold everywhere, and it doesn't really make you drowsy. What it's doing, it's regulating that sleeping and waking cycle. And so it's not really the best thing to take as a sleep aid per se. So as the light fades, the serotonin in our body kind of goes to melatonin. And melatonin works by making the GABA released in the brain. GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, so it slows everything down. And then in the morning, when the light starts coming in the window, melatonin scurries away and we wake up. Now here's the key. Most of our serotonin and melatonin are made in our gut, in the intestine. The microbes in the intestine have a circadian rhythm as well. And so you see all different kinds of numbers, but I think they say we have about 30 trillion cells in our body. Well, we have 10 times that many microbes in and on our body. And what I also like to say is they invented us to carry them around. And it's really kind of true, because they are communicating with every cell in the body, the brain especially. Brain health is relies a great deal on the health of the microbiome, we call it now. And so that's where we want to have that diversity of culture. The healthier the microbiome, I don't think I put that word on here anywhere, but the healthier that culture is in the body, the better our circadian rhythm is going to work. So this is a really good place to focus. So things that are hard on that gut are any kind of processed foods, especially gluten, especially sugar obviously, and high fructose corn syrup that's in the sodas. That's why we don't drink sodas anymore. Then we want to plant with probiotics, are the actual microbes themselves, and cabbage has a natural affinity for lactobacillus bacteria. So if we ferment it, if we salt it and let it sit, it turns into sauerkraut, and it's delicious. And in fact, there's a gal here in town, Michelle, who, have you seen her Mendo ferments at the farmer's market? She's selling them at Mariposa now. And this one is the fresh turmeric sauerkraut. It has cabbage, fresh turmeric, ginger, fennel, coriander, black pepper, fenugreek, and salt. Fenugreek is a great thing for kind of thinning the mucus and getting things moving. It's wonderful. That is medicine right there. This is food as medicine right here. And you eat a little glob of it with your eggs. It's just fabulous. Kefir, other fermented foods, they're super easy to make as well. And then we want to feed microbes with prebiotics. See the difference, pre and pro? And I've got a big list of those in your handout for you. And they're all really delicious. There's a few foods, and I've got a longer list in your handout as well, of foods that promote melatonin production. But we want to remember that melatonin is a hormone. And when hormones feed back to that hypothalamus, so if we take a hormone as a pill, that hypothalamus is going to go, hey, we've got enough melatonin. We don't need to make any more. So if I stop taking that melatonin, how do I make more melatonin? Because it's all fooled. It's going to really mess up my ability to regulate those hormones. So now finally we're up in the north and we're setting the environment for sleep. And so our sleep environment, we want to take care of the light. Nowadays, people are making amber lights. There's two different kinds of light bulbs you can get that are kind of amber. And so you can have those in your bedroom and keep the light low. And it's good to have blackout curtains if you live in a place where there's light that you can't get out. But generally, instead of blackout curtains, we tend to favor wearing a mask. Because in the morning, a little bit of light comes in and it does the job of helping you to wake up. So earplugs are good for noise. One of the best things that I know for getting that cortisol to reduce is taking a hot bath or a warm shower and then sleeping in a cool room. Because it sort of raises the cortisol and then drops it. That's what the amber lights do, is they don't have the blue light in them. And so we have a little bit of light here. It's still early in the day. The sun's still up. What Chris was just saying is that if you're working in a room where you have lights below you, that's why we have lights on the bedside instead of up above. So turn off the overhead lights at night. That's great. Important to have a comfortable bed. My favorite is a latex foam rubber bed. I'm not sure how available they are. I know there's a place out on the coast that has wonderful, very expensive foam latex beds and air beds. Anybody else have a type of bed that they recommend? They find really Tempur-Pedic, people like that. Okay. Snoring can be a sign of sleep apnea, and it's a very serious condition that needs to be handled. And I was looking that up a little bit, and there's basically two types of sleep apnea. There's obstructive sleep apnea, where the palate gets in the way and causes that kind of noise. But then if that goes on a long time, it can become central apnea, where it's more the brain is waking the person up. And one thing I saw, so you've all heard of the CPAP machine, which sort of forces some air in there. But there's now something that I saw, and I checked it out just so I know what it was. It's called a Winx, where it kind of pulls, through a little suction, pulls the tongue and the palate forward to keep it open. So anybody tried any of those? Anybody?
How do you spell that? Winx?
Winx, with an X, W-I-N-X. That is very important. And pets, what can I say? Get them young and train them to sleep in their own bed. Not to mention children. Okay, and like I said, I asked earlier about sleeping with your cell phone in the room. Absolutely want to cut down on the Wi-Fi as much as possible. I have access to a meter. I wasn't able to bring it tonight. It would take too much time anyway. But there are meters on the market where you can actually test the level that's coming off of that. And what we find is, so if this is a cell phone, right about here, the EMF drops off quite a bit. So that's why we use our speakerphone. I really don't recommend holding it up to your head ever. And so we want to have a place where we've plugged the phone in that's not in the bedroom.
Or you can put them on airplane.
Yeah, put it on airplane mode. This is kind of important. It's all pretty self-explanatory, but what we want to do ideally is, it's ideal to have a regular bedtime. And through the whole week, even on the weekend if you have weekends off. So most people have to get up at a certain time. And so you take that wake-up time and you count back 7.5 hours, and you go to bed at that time. And you set your alarm to wake up at that wake-up time. And if you woke up right about when the alarm was going off and you feel refreshed, you've got your ideal going to bed and waking up time. If you were sound asleep when the alarm went off and you put it on snooze 4 or 5 times, that means you need to count back a little bit and try again with a little bit earlier bedtime. If you woke up before the alarm, an hour before the alarm, you could probably go to bed an hour later. So it's it's a pretty obvious way to determine that. So the basic sleep tips to finish up here is we want to really slow down. You know, something I've been trying to do is cut out some of the extra things that I'm doing so that I have more time to have an extra hour or two to prepare for bed at night. And again, the adrenals really like regularity and predictability. Really ideal, especially if you're having adrenal fatigue, to give yourself a couple hours to really prepare for bed and turn the lights down, take a bath, that sort of thing. And short list of some of the main herbs that we use. I have a few more of them in your list, and there's one of my favorite sites for herbs, just for quick information, is herbs2000.com. They always have really good, simple information. If your cortisol is high, Tulsi is a wonderful tea, and we can get that now at the store. Tulsi is also an adaptogen. Again, if you're too high, it'll bring you down. If you're too low, it'll bring you up. So Tulsi has a really good effect on lowering that high cholesterol. And then we already talked about the adrenal tonic for low cortisol. Magnesium is one of the very most simple, best ways to calm you down. And I've listed a few different kinds. I'm just trying out the magnesium threonate. Glycine and threonine are two amino acids. And that's how the magnesium is often prepared. It's kind of chelated with an amino acid. And threonine, or magnesium threonate, is pretty much the only magnesium that's known to cross the blood-brain barrier. So it has a really nice calming effect. And I used that last night. It worked great.
And
Yes.
so I've been taking mine in the morning, but would you recommend taking it at night?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Magnesium at night's
Night,
perfect.
okay.
And GABA, like I was talking about before, is an inhibitory nerve transmitter. Serotonin and GABA are the inhibitory nerve transmitters. And so we want to promote those. You can actually take GABA as a supplement. And if you really feel like you need to use melatonin, especially if you're a shift worker or something like that, I recommend starting with 0.5 milligram. And it's hard to find that in the store. I can get it. But 0.5 to maybe 1 milligram would be okay, about an hour and a half before you want to go to bed. Not right before, because it needs to take some time. But then you don't want to do that every single night. And I hear about people, and I've seen recommendations for different illnesses of taking large amounts of melatonin. And what does that do? It feeds back up here and says, stop making melatonin. So we don't make our own melatonin anymore. And it's really not a good thing to do, I don't think. Won't spend a lot of time on this, but bananas have a lot of magnesium in them, and the peel has 3 times the amount in the banana. So we make a tea out of it. Just wash it off, cut off the ends, and boil it just lightly for about 3 minutes, and then steep it for a little longer, and drink the water. It's delicious. It's a good source of magnesium.
So this is the whole banana?
Yeah, the whole banana with the peel. Yeah, and just cut it in half or so. So now it's morning, the sky's blue. Have you ever seen the vultures sunning their wings? I thought that was a great picture. So in the morning, we want to take a moment to reflect on your dreams. And the most important thing is get out and see the sun, which now we finally can. Or be outdoors, see some blue sky. Or if you need to, use a light box with a full spectrum light. That really resets the melatonin better than anything, to have that light in the morning. It's a very, very clear signal to the brain. Oh, it's morning and melatonin is stopping, and then that sets the circadian rhythm for the rest of the day. Water, really important. Insomnia is a sign of hypohydration, low hydration. So drinking plenty of water through the day, and morning is a great time to start drinking water. Green tea is one of the 3 things I know that stimulates the body to make antioxidants. It's fabulous, along with broccoli and turmeric. So there's our turmeric again. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, as we all know, and it's really important to have protein. How many people don't eat any breakfast? Yeah, so what we want to do to start with is just have a bite of some protein, just a bite, and just gradually sort of work your way into having a little bit of protein. Again, we've got the shell-cooked eggs recipe there for you. Moving around in the morning is really important, and if you have any kind of difficulty with your joints that keep you from actually going out for a walk, or you can just wiggle a little bit Just kind of move all the joints. Move your fingers, move your toes, kind of circle your wrists and ankles. That makes a huge difference to get things going. And of all the things that I read about exercising in the morning is one of the best things to ensure a good night's sleep. We call it forest bathing, walking in the woods. And so now we're coming back down to the end here, and we want to build a nest of ways to relax. We'll take a moment here. So let's pretend like it's the end of the day. We're snuggling in bed, and we want to check in with how is our breathing going. And, is it kind of tight, or are we breathing at all? What's my energy level? Am I feeling sleepy, or am I just wide awake? Am I wired and tired? That's both mental and physical fatigue when that's happening. And it's a good thing to do to kind of scan through the body. Take a moment, kind of scan through. See if any part of your body is talking to you right now. Any sensations or maybe pain happening. I call it the food tube, the digestive tract. What's going on in there? How was my nutrition today, and my self-care in general? And it's really important not to judge ourselves too much when we do this. We're just observing, very lightly observing. And what's the mental chatter? What am I holding on to anything? And so I've got a little touchstone here called Enter. With our breathing, extend the exhale. That's easy. We always have our breath with us. We can always breathe out. With our energy, we can build a nest. And when I say a nest, I'm thinking of an image in your mind's eye, or if you're not visual, maybe it's sounds, maybe it's something tactile that feels really safe and comfortable to you. A place you can go where you are completely in charge of everything, all your needs are met. And so I encourage you to create an image of a nest. And you know how a nest is made up of lots of different twigs and feathers? Well, we choose our favorite music, and our favorite people, and our favorite colors, our favorite location. What does the ground feel like under your feet? What does the air smell like? It might be nice to have a little bit of essential oil if you like that sort of thing, to evoke, if you're a very smell-oriented person, to evoke that feeling of relaxation, something that can be repeated. And if there's pain, we go and we massage that part, the neck especially. Find those tender spots and give it that 10 on the tender. Perfect time. You can reach most of the parts. You can reach your legs really easy. You can reach your neck. It's relaxed when you're lying down. You can reach your arms. If our belly's talking to us, what do? We eat a few bites of some vegetable and protein. That's kind of the ideal. And if there's mental chatter, we work to release that, to relax that. In Chinese medicine, we say that our mind is here. And so, just even kind of putting in our hand, our heart is about the size of our fist. And so sometimes our heart is tight as a fist too. So if we just imagine this area relaxing, can just hold our heart and breathe into that and exhale through it. And that's one of the most calming things we can do. If you have a lot of things to remember, make a list so that we can forget about it. The classic thing is to go through and think of things that you're grateful for. And I also like to think of the body kind of like an island. You know how if you were cast to sea and you washed up on an island, at first it would seem all mysterious and complicated. But within a month or two of going around that island and learning where you are, you'd know every rock and every tree. And the body's kind of like that. It's not linear. The body's not linear. It has lots of ins and outs and ups and downs. And so, but I encourage you to get to know the body. There's lots of good ways to do that. The more we know ourselves, the more we have choices of how to carry on our day and our evening. Definitely by about 9 o'clock when the sun is going down, we definitely want to be heading towards bed about that time. Or earlier. Anyway. And just remember that sleep is the most natural thing. We don't have to learn to sleep. It comes naturally. And so you can sort of forget about what we talked about tonight. And really when we lie down, It's something that just happens naturally. All those hormones just flow. We don't have to make them flow.
Where does blue light come from?
Blue light, one of the electricians in
Well, there's blue light that naturally comes from the sun, which is
right, yeah.
that's something that can't the frequency of it can't really be replaced with lighting. It can get close, but there's a hole in it. Basically, it goes up and then it drops down, so you're not getting the even full spectrum bulbs don't quite get there because they can't reproduce that frequency. So essentially, there's good and bad blue light, and when you get, you've got manufacturers that do both. So it's good to get good blue light, and then there, it's like it's not good to have it around in the evening when you're getting ready for bed, but it's good to have in the mornings, like you said, when you wake up, during the day and maybe after lunch.
I have a feeling also that just regular light bulbs kind of trick the eye a little bit. And unless the light is specifically screening out the blue light, and if it's an amber light, then it helps us, then it doesn't trigger that part of the brain. So
Yeah, isn't the thyroid gland in the endocrine system, isn't that the main gland of the whole endocrine glands?
well, it's good that you brought that up because I kind of purposely didn't talk about the thyroid that much, but I sort of see the thyroid. The thyroid is a key gland up here, and I see the thyroid. If the adrenals are happy, the thyroid is more happy, because if the adrenals get off balance, then the thyroid has to come in and try to balance everything. So as long as the adrenals and the reproductive hormones, they're the base of the triangle, they're the steroid hormones. If they're balanced, then the thyroid can go on doing what it's doing. And it's definitely part of sleep too. So, I hope that answered your question.
You didn't mention tryptophan.
Tryptophan is also an amino acid, like threonine and glycine. And tryptophan is the base of serotonin. And it also is possible to take tryptophan, or what's called 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan. Serotonin is 5-hydroxytryptamine, and serotonin and 5-HTP is 5-hydroxytryptophan. So they're very close. That's something that we want to be careful with also, because we don't want to overproduce serotonin. But eating foods that have tryptophan in them, like chicken and turkey, both are good sources of tryptophan. So that's good.
I just wanted to ask, when you said take turmeric and lecithin, I could just buy the lecithin, buy the turmeric?
Yes, actually in your resources, I've got a note for that. That's something that I carry, but it's kind of on the expensive side for me to carry. So I've been recommending that people go to any one of the sites that sell supplements like VitaCost or whatever. There's a brand called Source Naturals that is sold in the health food store. I haven't checked at Mariposa if they have it, but you can get it online for just a little bit more than what I can even get it for wholesale. Source Naturals brand, they call it turmeric with Mariva, and I've got that written in here.
Okay, you have to do it like that. You have to buy it already prepared.
Yes, that's really ideal for it. That's kind of halfway between herbs and medicine. It's a produced product. It's the most effective thing I've found. But people are making turmeric milk now with a little coconut milk and a little pepper, because those are things that are considered to get it into the cell more. But just eating turmeric like curry, it's a wonderful food. It's great for the liver. It's cooling. It's just excellent. It's a great antioxidant, but it's not as medicinal as the turmeric with the Mariva, the lecithin.
How about the turmeric root? You can make tea from that?
Sure, you can cook with turmeric all you want. It's great. I feel that probably medical doctors are going to eventually go into that area because it's a huge industry. But sometimes you can find a functional medicine physician who has studied more more different ways of healing. But I'd be happy, one of the things I like about what I do is I get to spend a couple hours or an hour and a half with people, and that's really unusual. And in Chinese medicine, everything's connected. There's nothing only thing that's left out of Chinese medicine is the brain. It's just the marrow. But everything, and we see how everything's connected. And someone with headaches might have headaches because of neck pain, or because of stress, or because of eating the wrong foods. So we try to look, or all three. And so we try to find out what's going on and work with that. Okay. My wish for you is that you have sweet dreams.